Good morning, Motor Valley, and welcome back to this second day dedicated to the live tour of the most representative and exciting and beautiful museums of the Motor Valley. We are here at the Ducati Museum in Borgo Panigale, but before I start, I would like to remind you that all the videos we are filming and the ones we have filmed yesterday in order to restart engine in our country and in our museums. Well, all these videos could be found on the website motorvalleyfest.it, and a further thing for our friends following us from abroad.
Remember that we are going to upload these videos online with the English translation in a few days. Allora,
Well, now, I'm here with Livio Lodi. He is the curator of the Ducati Museum. Thank you very much, Livio, for having us here. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We really have a lot to say. I think you represent the history of Ducati. You know everything about this company. I think we could start right now. Many people know Ducati for motorcycles, because now Ducati manufactures beautiful bikes like Panigale, Superleggera, Multistrada or Street Fighter, and Ducati is also well known for the competitions in MotoGP and Superbike. But visiting this museum is a chance to discover very peculiar things. Probably not everybody knows these things. We will start, in fact, from this wall that has nothing to do with motorbikes. In fact, Ducati started to manufacture radio equipment and condensers and capacitors for radio equipment back in 1926, when it was founded by Adriano, Bruno and Marcello Ducati. They were three brothers. So the history of this company starts following the inspiration of a great man from Bologna, Guglielmo Marconi. He was awarded with the Nobel Prize for for discovering the radio transmission. Let's say that Marconi was the founding father of today's Wi-Fi connection. These three brothers started in a small workshop in the very heart of Bologna with a few workers, and then in 1936 workers became 7,000. So the company grew a lot. The incredible growth of this company was due to the fact that this technology was brand new. But in my opinion, this technology was strategic as well, not only new, but also strategic. In fact, in the post-war period, Ducati switched from the production of radio capacitors and condensers to the production of motorbikes. This plant, Ducati plant, was forced to produce military products, and in 1943, in the year of the armistice, Italy was occupied by German troops and bombed in October of 1944. The plant, the factory, was bombed, so the brothers, Adriano, Bruno and Marcello, had to reinvent the production. And the first production of Ducati starts with this engine, so not with a full bike, but just with the engine. This is Ducati Cucciolo. This is the way the Cucciolo, this small engine you see, was applied on a bike. It was an auxiliary engine of 48 cc that could have been applied on bikes. It was 1.5 horsepower, it had 3 gears, and the three brothers opted for this strategy because at the end of the war, people didn't have money to buy a car or a motorbike, so the cheapest thing they could buy was an auxiliary engine. 3 years later, in 1949, the first Ducati was manufactured, the Ducati 60. It was a light bike. It was defined a light bike because you could have brought this bike inside your place, inside your home, because back at that time, bikes were stolen very, very often. There were many thefts around. I forgot to say something very important. The itinerary in this museum, it is a real itinerary through three new concepts, three new ideas we wanted to incorporate in our visit. Here, Ducati is described not only through race bikes but also through road bikes. We decided to do so because in the previous version of the museum, which was renovated and renewed in 2016, there were no road bikes. But actually, road bikes are a very telling and representative part of our company. In fact, in the 50s, Ducati changed ownership. It became a state-owned company. And in 1954, when there was a separation, a fracture, a breaking point in the company, an engineer, Fabio Taglioni, was hired. And Fabio Taglioni, this man, became an important character, an important figure, an important man for this company. This year, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary since he was born. So Fabio Taglioni knew that the company needed to develop and to manufacture new road and racing bikes, and the technologies of the racing bikes had to be implemented in terms of innovation and technology in road bikes. So everything started with a racing bike that was manufactured in 1957. I'm talking about the Ducati 125 Sport. Taglioni was a creative man, and today we recall his action, his work in Ducati for the invention of the Desmodromic System, one of the main traits and features of Ducati, and also the twin-cylinder engine and the Trellis Frame. So let's start from the Desmodromic System. Here we have a very simple example of the Desmodromic System. This system consisted of opening system of the valves without the help, without the aid of springs. So thanks to this system, we had a higher engine speed that was not reachable, that was not possible in engines with return springs. So in 1957, we launched the Ducati 125 Sport. These bikes were used in the MotoGiro, a bike marathon from Milan to Taranto, and also the Tour World, made by Leopoldo Tartarini and Giorgio Monetti. These two men did a whole world tour with this bike, and this happened in 1957. When there was no assistance, let's say no technologies, there were no technologies like GPS or TomTom. That's why Ducati became very visible in the 50s, because it was a winning company not only in racetracks but also in road. If we mention Mr. Taglioni, we also need to mention other people like racers and mechanics. Mr. Taglioni has always collaborated with people who helped him throughout his whole period in this company, like Franco Fernet, Bruno Spaggiari, and also many other people we don't have time, unfortunately, we don't have time to tell about. We have mentioned the history of Desmo 16. Desmo 16 represents a sort of tip of the iceberg. It is what we see at the beginning, but Desmo 16 has a grandmother, which is the Ducati Grand Sport Marianna. This is the first bike manufactured by Taglioni when he started to work for Ducati in 1954. This bike was manufactured in 50 days, just in 50 days. Why am I telling you about this bike? Because today we interpret drivers and racers as people who just compete. But back in that time, racers were also mechanics, and in fact we are seeing some evidence here. As you see, this is an uncovered springs engine, because back at that time we didn't have the Desmodromic system, and in case the engine or the spring broke, racers had to replace the springs on their own. We are talking about motorcycle marathons going from Milan to Taranto. So bikers and racers had to change and replace spare parts on their own. That's why we had in that time spare throttle cable or spare brake cable. Racers, sorry, had their leather suit, and inside the leather suit they had some pockets in which they kept these spare parts, or in this back end, as you see, as I have just shown you. I will tell you more of these anecdotes. But now I'm going to focus on the Desmodromic system, specifically speaking of the 125 Desmo and 250 Desmo. The Desmo system made its debut in 1956 in the Demora racetrack. The racer back in that time was from Modena. He was Gianni degli Antoni. These bikes are very hard to be found now, today. This is the 250 and it was used by Mike Elwood. Our friends, our fans will notice a detail. Yes, in fact, I was about to ask you about the story of these prancing horse. Yes, obviously the prancing horse is a clear reference to our cousins of Maranello, but actually in the case of Fabio Taglioni, the prancing horse is a reference to Francesco Baracca, a real ace of the First World War, a man we could define as our Red Baron. He was a pilot who shot down many enemies' aircrafts in 1918. He was remembered, he's recalled as a hero, and he was born in the same town of Mr. Taglioni. So Mr. Taglioni wanted to pay tribute to this man who had a prancing horse on his aircraft. That's why Taglioni decided to put the prancing horse on the motorbikes. Ducati changed color in that years. Bikes were red in that period, but then they became silver. Let's now talk about eras, because one of the key interpretations of our museum is according to eras. We have 4 rooms here, and according to the room, we experiment, we live in a different era, in a different period of time. I think this is our key interpretation. Thanks to these eras, we can live our motorbikes not just as a mere object, but as a living body, like in this case, the case of Scrambler. For people over 60, this bike has been an icon. The Scrambler was the most desired object among young people in the 70s and in the 60s too. We find ourselves in the period of Woodstock, the flower children, the hippies, and in that time, boys and girls wanted to feel free. And the symbol of freedom was this bike. This bike had a very great driving pleasure. The yellow color was very fashionable. Some colors were yellow ochre, orange, or yellow. And this bike became the most desired object because it was very easy to drive. The only flaw was that it was a single-cylinder engine. And why am I saying that this fact of having just one cylinder was a flaw? Well, actually, the reason is very simple. Back in that time, Italy started to receive the first big bikes from Japan. So the maximum of our bikes was 450cc, and we were receiving very huge engines from Japan, like Honda, Yamahas, or MVs. That's why in 1971, the same year of production of the Scrambler, we see that Ducati started to manufacture this bike, the 750 GT. This bike is one of the last ones, and the very good thing about this bike is that it is one of the best preserved here in our museum. In this bike, we see for the first time the L shape of the twin-cylinder engine of Ducati. Back in that time, this engine used the bevel gear system, the same system used in the 60s and in the 70s. We can hardly say whether this bike were more appreciated than the others or not. But we know that for sure that this 750 was a very appreciated one. I would ask now the cameraman to place himself here because I would like to show you one of the key interpretations of our museum. I mean, the way we can notice that just in a few years these motorcycles had changed. I've talked to you about the 750 of 1971, but here you have the 500 Panta of 1979, the first bike using a strap distribution and a trellis frame. The trellis frame is the second very important thing Mr. Taglioni carried out. Why is it so beautiful to see all this? Because when we look at a photo, when we look photo, we don't notice all these details. But if we find ourselves in the middle of many bikes, we have many other things to observe. So this is a trellis frame of a racing bike. I'm making reference to the TT2 and TT1 series. There is a very important detail here, the fact that this trellis frame was reviewed and remanufactured for the production of this motorbike. I was saying before that Ducati was a state-owned company. In 1985, Ducati was acquired by Cagiva Group, and it became part of a holding including other brands like Moto Morini and Husqvarna. In 1985, Ducati manufactures the 750 F1. This bike is still so much loved by aficionados and supporters and Ducati fans. And it represented the relaunch of Ducati after some difficult years because the manufacturing of bikes went through a very bad time. In 1986, sorry, I interrupt you because if I'm not wrong, you have your personal story, your personal anecdote about this bike. Yeah, thanks for stopping me because actually I was waiting for you to ask me about that personal story. This is the 750 Paso. This is the first bike manufactured by Massimo Tamburini for Ducati, obviously. Massimo Tamburini was the founding father of Bimota in 1973. Then he left, he quit with Bimota and he started to work for Cagiva. I really care about this bike because you may trust me or not, but 30 years ago I started to work here on this bike. I was a worker and I had to assemble this bike. I had to check the chassis number and it was one of the first bikes I had to build. I would have never imagined that one day it would have ended up here in the museum. And this bike represents the style, the design of Ducati, and it also the return of the red. The experience with Cagiva was strengthened by the participation in the Paris-Dakar competition when the Cagiva, this model of Cagiva, won the Paris-Dakar competition. This was a Cagiva Elephant, and the engine assembled on this bike was a Ducati engine. It was the perfect combination, the perfect meeting between these two companies, Ducati and Cagiva. We have been talking about twin-cylinder engines and many other things, but we need to step back in time and we have to go back to the 70s, specifically in 1971 and 72 when these two bikes were manufactured, the 500 GP and the 750 Imola Desmo. The 500 GP was the first racing bike of Ducati, the bike that paved the way to all the twin cylinders engines for racing. The other bike, the 750, was the one with which Bruno Spadali and Paul Smart won in 1972. And then we arrived to the 750 Super Sport Desmo that were used in the championship of derived bikes from standard production, the current Superbike. And here we have a bike from 1978 with which Mike Elwood won a title in 1978. This bike has its own story, its own anecdote. And you can see here a tennis ball containing a sponge. Mike Elwood used the sponge to clean his helmet while he was racing. I forgot to say something because I really care about these little stories. This bike has a peculiarity. As you see, the exhaust pipe is higher than the exhaust pipe on the right, because in Imola there are many left turns. So Mr. Taglioni decided to rise a bit the left exhaust pipe so that he wouldn't touch the asphalt while cornering, and also this unpainted stripe in the tank, so to check the level of gasoline, of fuel. So this solution was very useful to remove weight from, to make the bike lighter. Yes, and Mr. Taglioni thought that bikes had to be very light. This is the TT2. This new engine doesn't use anymore the bevel gears, rather it uses the strap distribution. This bike is from 1981, and in 1985 and 86 we will also have the 750 F1. This bike is very much related to Marco Lucchinelli, a racer who won the Battle of the Twin in Daytona, and also a further race, the Laguna Seca 200 miles, and in Misano in 1986 he won in the 200 miles against Joy Dunlop. Now let's talk about Superbike. In 1990 we start with Superbike. Ducati introduced the 4-valve air-cooled twin-cylinder engine. The 851 from 1990 is the first Ducati bike winning the first world title with Raymond Ross. I always say that Ducati in Superbike Championship has won 17 Constructor World Championship, 14 Racers World Championship, and also more than 300 victories in 30 years of competition. Raymond Ross was the first one, then we had Dan Polen, and we also have here a Super Mono. A model of Super Mono. This is a milestone of Ducati. If we talk about Super Mono, we have to talk about that period in which Ducati started to manufacture bikes, being very attentive to design and style. And then we arrived to the 916. The Super Mono was made by Pierre Blanche. The project was by Claudio Domenicali, our current CEO. So this is the first masterpiece of Claudio Domenicali. Then we have the 916 with our racer car Fogarty. This is one of the most telling elements for the new generations. Car Fogarty won 4 Superbike championships with this model, with this very model. He only used this bike to win those 4 championships. And Troy Bayliss won the title in 2001. And after that winning, we see that racers ceased to use the 916 and the rest of derived bikes, and in fact the 999 came up. Now we are going through the most iconic bikes of Ducati. I think we have 2 iconic bikes, the 916 on one hand and the Monster on the other. I think these are not vintage bikes. The Monster is 27 years old and the 916 is 26. The Monster was designed by Michele Galluzzi and the production started in March 1993. And the 916 was manufactured by Massimo Tamburini. The history of 916 is very famous because Massimo Tamburini manufactured this bike, but he never went to the wind tunnel. He inspired in this. He was inspired by riding the bike under the rain and just checking the way the water drops ran in the fairing of the bike. Unfortunately, we don't have so much time, but we have loads of things to discover here. We have loads of anecdotes to tell you, and I would like to warmly invite Ducati fans to visit our museum. Now, let's talk about Desmo 16. This is the most recent history of Ducati. 70 years have gone since the first winning of Loris Capirossi in Catalonia in 2003, when Desmo 16 made its debut in the MotoGP, and Ducati had not been competing in MotoGP since 1971. So after 30 years, making a debut with a new bike and winning was exceptional. Let alone the title we won with Casey Stoner in 2007 with the Desmo 16. This moment represented the top moment, the best moment of our lives, of our history. Now, it's a long time since we last won the title, but thanks to the Desmo 16s designed by Mr. Dalligna and driven by Andrea Dovizioso and Danilo Petrucci, we are now back to winning. We are winning several races, and fans know that Ducati is there again. We are a small company compared to Honda and other bike companies, but even if we are a small one, I think we are doing exceptional things. Here we have the bike of Nicky Hayden. It is a sort of tribute to the American racer who died, who passed away recently, a few years ago. And then the 1198 used by Carlos Checa in 2011 when he won the world title. In the last room we have a sort of summary, a very telling summary of what Ducati has always done. The technologies of the MotoGP bikes were used and implemented in modern bikes, in modern road bikes, not only in terms of electronic components, but also in terms of composite material. And this is an example, the RR Desmo 16. It was the first road version of a GP bike, and then the first bike equipped with traction control, and then the Multistrada 1200 from 2010. Here we have a bike equipped with 4 different driving systems. And behind our cameraman we have the first version of the Superleggera, the 1199 Panigale. This bike represents the best in class today for people who are fond of technology and who want to have the top experience with our motorcycles. I think it is useful to mention the 2014 Scrambler. In 2014, Ducati decided to propose its fans this motorbike. This is a new interpretation, a reinterpretation of the Scrambler. It is not this bike was not manufactured for because people were feeling nostalgic. It was a way. It was rather a way to reinterpret the past in modern times. And many clients bought this bike and they find it very, very easy to use, and the driving style is really amusing, and it is a pleasure to drive it. I noticed that in the walls where the descriptions are, there is always a smartphone symbol. Yes, that's true. In fact, I think it is very important to say that when you visit Ducati, you are visiting something else. You're not only visiting the museum, but you have the chance to visit the factory and the production line. In fact, as soon as we will be ready to reopen our doors, visitors will be able to visit the factories. And that symbol you saw of the smartphone, we decided to put it there because you can download a web app, you can download it from the museum, and by using your smartphone and your tablet, you can follow a guided tour using your earpods. And if you love details and if you want to know everything about Ducati, you can access the museum at 9 a.m. in the morning and you can spend your whole day here. Obviously, with the coronavirus epidemic, we will have to reorganize the timetable and the time slots, but this experience in this museum is a total experience. Whether you are a Ducati fan or not, I think this experience it is really worth. Everyone should come here and visit the museum because the motorcycle world is such an open world. There is no rivalry like in football. There is no competition. You go out for a ride with your friends and you don't and it doesn't matter whether your friends have different bike from yours. So I think this is the real advantage, the real good thing about riding. Well, this museum finishes, this gallery finishes with these leather racing suits since the 50s. It is a sort of tribute we pay to our racers. Today we often speak about today's racers, but I think that Troy Bayliss, Smart, Moggi, Farnet, and Villa, everyone deserves to be mentioned because they are all part of our history. I made a remark before. I said that now our doors are shut down because of the recent lockdown due to the coronavirus epidemic, but we will reopen soon. Actually, we are reopening now thanks to your visit and thanks for this opportunity. I would like to remind our friends who are following us in streaming that we have an updated version of the museum virtual tour. You can enjoy this broadcasting in Ducati website. I've been talking about Fabio Taglioni. In a short time, we are going to release a trailer that gives an introduction to to a to a series, to a sort of graphic novel. I beg your pardon, but I'm not used to use terms from English. I always try to use Italian words. Well, in this graphic novel, we will try to tell the story of Fabio Taglioni in the 100th anniversary since he was born. So thanks for this visit. It was a good chance to know so many things about Ducati and about you. We are going to post this video on the website motorvalleyfest.it. Thanks for staying with us. You can see also the schedule of our visits in the same website. Thank you.